Good evening and welcome again to Fox News at Night. I'm Ed Henry in Washington, in for Shannon Bream all week. New tonight, in an unfolding controversy involving President Barack Obama and President Donald Trump, David Axelrod, the longtime Obama advisor, says tonight the former president did indeed take a shot at President Trump during an interview with Britain's Prince Harry, despite not naming the current president directly in that sit-down. And what's more, Axelrod is accusing the current commander-in-chief of using social media to, quote, divide the American community, part of a plague on the entire conversation on the internet, unquote. The attacks mirror those from his former boss, Barack Obama, who seems to be breaking a recent tradition of former presidents not eviscerating their successors. Our correspondent Lauren Blanchard joins us live tonight to lay out the firestorm that's playing out. Good to see you, Lauren.
Hey, Ed. Well, in that friendly interview, former President Obama said how people interact on social media today could splinter society, especially when used by leaders to divide, in a not-so-subtle reference to the current commander-in-chief's famous Twitter use.
One of the dangers of the internet is that people can have entirely different realities. They can be just cocooned in information that reinforces their current biases.
He's certainly not the only one. He is the most powerful one right now, but this is something that plagues the entire conversation on the internet, and this is something President Obama has been concerned about for a long time.
And the president doesn't seem likely to close his Twitter app anytime soon, waving this "keep on tweeting" sign when he landed in Florida for the Christmas holiday, despite the many politicians and pundits who have called on the president to stop. And there is an unwritten rule that former presidents typically do not publicly speak ill of their successors. While former President Obama did not specifically call out President Trump's Twitter use, it's not the first time Mr. Obama has stirred controversy for his veiled jabs. At an event in Chicago earlier this month, President Obama raised eyebrows while talking about the need to protect American freedoms like the press, a regular target of President Trump's frustration. Mr. Obama suggesting the U.S. could go the way of Germany in the 1930s if citizens grew complacent, saying we have to tend to this garden of democracy or else things could fall apart quickly. And there's also the question of whether the Obamas, who are close to Prince Harry, will get an invitation to the big royal wedding in May, and if President Trump will be snubbed by the royal couple. British tabloids report some government officials worry not inviting the current president could strain U.S.-UK relations, but the prince says the guest list is still up in the air. Ed?
I suspect after that interview, President Trump may not want an invite. Lauren Blanchard, thanks for giving us all the information. With President Trump tearing apart his predecessor's legacy, one government regulation at a time, it's probably not surprising they have real sharp policy differences. But complaining about tweets? Let's dig a little deeper with Fox News contributor, senior editor at The Federalist, Molly Hemingway, and senior politics writer for U.S. News and World Report, David Cantonese. I appreciate you both coming in. David, I want to start with you because on one hand, there is this recent tradition. George W. Bush in particular made it clear, I'm getting off the stage. I'm not going to attack Barack Obama once he comes to office, even though we have sharp differences. But you go back in history, Eisenhower, Truman, these two went after each other. There have been many examples. But why won't Barack Obama just leave the stage?
Well, look, I think first we have to be careful. He never even mentions Donald Trump. He's been very sparing in his criticism.
But David Axelrod made it clear.
I think we all know what he's talking about. But
so
I would say he is breaking precedent because Trump is breaking precedent in how he is acting. No one, I mean, President Trump acting on social media is different than what we've ever seen. Criticizing the FBI director, criticizing his own attorney general, criticizing Hillary Clinton constantly with caustic attacks. So I think, nicknames, everybody's, up for grabs for this guy. So I think President Obama feels a responsibility to weigh in, but he's doing it very sparingly. He's not going to the level that President Trump is.
President Trump is fair game as well. David makes a fair point. But if you're Barack Obama and you want to deliver a punch, why not just say it? Why are you playing these games and saying the 1930s in Germany? He's basically comparing this president to Hitler, to the Nazis.
I think the thing that basically differentiates Barack Obama from Donald Trump is that Donald Trump is more aggressive, whereas Barack Obama is passive aggressive. And so he doesn't name him, but everybody knows he's talking about him. You know, when he had policy differences with Republicans over immigration, he said that Republicans were scared of widows and 3-year-old orphans. He's fond of attacking. He just did it in a more passive aggressive fashion, and people are not familiar with this more direct, like straight on insulting fashion. They both could stand to improve their insult game.
Are there a couple of other things going on? First, David, I talked to Democratic insiders who say they think that Barack Obama is one of the only senior Democrats who can get inside this president's head. And that's partly what's going on. He doesn't care what Schumer says, Pelosi, Chuck and Nancy dismiss. But when Barack Obama speaks, this president listens.
Possibly, but I think, to Molly's point, he's got such a different demeanor and his approach. Is the softer touch the way to get into Donald Trump's head? I mean, usually what we saw through the campaign is if you strike back at Trump, he hits back twice as hard.
He responds to a real punch, not to a wimpy punch.
Well, and Obama's just never going to go there. He never had that temperament. He's not going to use the rhetoric that Donald Trump has. But I think if you talk to Republicans, I did over the last week doing my Trump end of year story, they want him to stop tweeting. They think, I mean, John Kelly, his chief of staff, wants him to do less tweeting. The people supportive of him want him to tweet less.
This is his way, and he says it again and again, and he's right on this point. This is how he gets around the mainstream media, unfiltered. And Molly, I want to ask you, as much as the Democrats dismiss the tweeting, for the former president, he could have gone after the tax cut. He could have gone on and on about literally dozens of Trump policies. Does this suggest that maybe the tweeting gets to the Democrats more than they want to admit?
Well, also, he's not going after all of the policy accomplishments because it's a rebuttal of what the previous 8 years
tearing apart the Obama legacy.
You can go after tweets because generally people do say, oh, I don't like the way he tweets, even if they actually kind of do enjoy it and they enjoy following him and they react to everything he says. But you can't go after this strong record of tearing down all the buildup and regulations, the Supreme Court appointment, you know, the huge success of the tax cut at the end of the year, the defeating ISIS, you know, and
that Obama couldn't do. He called ISIS the JV squad.
Yeah, so instead of going after policy stuff, you go after the rhetoric because it's an easy hit.
So real quick, maybe does this suggest that even Barack Obama knows that Trump is succeeding more than Democrats want to admit?
I think everyone is having that end-of-year realization that as they spent the whole year mocking his Twitter, he actually had a very successful year.
He's had more success on policy, but he's losing public opinion. This is still a president at 37% approval rating, one of the lowest in history.
Fair point, but when Bernie Sanders is even saying, hey, the tax cut's not so bad.
It is, but it's not popular.
Maybe it's going to get more popular.
That's a big question.
Appreciate you both coming in.
Sure thing.
Meanwhile, lawyers for President Trump keep saying they expect the Russia probe to wind up soon, at least the parts involving the president. But Robert Mueller may have other ideas, with a new report suggesting the special counsel may be widening his probe by now going after the Trump campaign's digital team. That as questions continue to mount about perceived bias at the Justice Department and the FBI, clouding these various investigations so much that one Republican lawmaker suggested this week there should be a purge of those law enforcement agencies.
I would like to see the directors of those agencies purge it and say, look, we've got a lot of great agents, a lot of great lawyers here. Those are the people that I want the American people to see and know the good work's being done, not these people who are kind of the deep state.
Now, in response, Ohio Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan issued a statement saying Republican calls to undermine these most basic pillars of our democracy are not normal. They aren't just politics. They are downright un-American. Being able to independently investigate our own government, free from political influence, is what makes our nation great, and it's what sets us apart from the rest of the world. For more, let's bring in Matt Gaetz. He's a Republican congressman from Florida. Good to see you. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year almost, sir.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you as well, Ed.
Congressman, do we need to see a purge at the FBI?
Well, let me start by saying that Tim Ryan doesn't have the right to shine Francis Rooney's shoes. Ambassador Rooney has worked overseas on behalf of the United States of America and knows full well the good work that far too many, or a great deal of folks are doing at the FBI and Department of Justice. The problem is in the swamp of Washington, D.C., the biggest alligator is a politicized FBI and Department of Justice. And that's why we're fighting hard to make sure that we've got a fair and equal opportunity for all sides to be heard and that you don't have this pro-Hillary Clinton bias, anti-Donald Trump bias, continue to infect our institutions and our systems that all Americans should be able to rely on.
I hear you defending Congressman Rooney, but do you agree with him? You're upset about the FBI and what's going on, but should there be a purge?
Well, the purge is happening. We just saw Andrew McCabe announce his retirement recently. You saw Bruce Orr, who was at the Department of Justice, demoted, and you saw Peter Strzok, the person who sent these horrible anti-Trump text messages, the same Peter Strzok who was very involved in the exoneration statement for Hillary Clinton and then got drafted into the Mueller probe. He's also been demoted and reassigned. And so time and again, you see the senior leadership at these agencies exposed for their bias, and that shouldn't in any way impair the good work that folks on the ground are doing each and every day to protect the country.
Congressman, that's your view of the FBI. You just mentioned Robert Mueller. I did as well a moment ago. Yahoo News has a new report out. Here's what they say about the Mueller probe. Quote, in just the last few weeks, his prosecutors have begun questioning Republican National Committee staffers about the party digital operation that worked with the Trump campaign to target voters in key swing states. They're seeking to determine if the joint effort was related to the activities of Russian trolls and bots aimed at influencing the American electorate, according to two sources. So, bottom line, what does that tell you about the Mueller probe? Are they going after Jared Kushner, for example, the president's son-in-law, who helped run that digital operation?
Well, here's what we know. The DNC and Hillary Clinton were paying people to go and pay Russians to tell lies about the president. And I guess the best evidence of collusion against Republicans is that Republicans and Russia were all on the same internet at the same time. It's ludicrous. Why are we not investigating the real crimes of the real criminals? Why aren't we investigating why the DNC's activities with the Fusion GPS company that was employing Bruce Orr's wife, Nellie Orr? That's the real collusion, and it's just outrageous to see this biased Mueller probe continue. I mean, if Bob Mueller were any more biased, we'd have to give him credentials for the mainstream media.
So are you calling for Robert Mueller to be fired when you say he's biased?
Yeah. Absolutely. I've been calling for Mueller to be fired for months now, and over 20 members of the House Judiciary Committee have been calling for a second special counsel to investigate the Clinton Foundation and Hillary Clinton, because there very well may be circumstances where the consequence of those bribes may be undermining American security moving forward. That's why we've got to get to the bottom of it, and we've got to end
I've just got 30 seconds
in the Trump presidency.
Let me unpack that, though. There have been some Republicans even saying if what happens is what you want, and the president fires Robert Mueller, we're going to have a constitutional crisis. You're okay with that?
No, the Attorney General should fire him. No, the president shouldn't have to fire him.
The Attorney General recused himself. The Attorney General recused himself. He's not involved.
Yeah, but that's the problem. We've got an Attorney General who's a spectator rather than the leader of the Department of Justice, and that undermines our democracy. There's no legal requirement for him to have recused himself in this matter. He needs to step up, be the Attorney General, fire Mueller, and appoint a second special counsel to evaluate the Clinton Foundation.
Strong words from the congressman. I suspect you might be fired up in part because of the Independence Bowl. I'm contractually obligated by Shannon Bream, my colleague, who has Florida State ties, as do you. Florida State 42, Southern Miss 13. Looks like you had a big bowl victory. Congratulations.
Absolutely. Go Noles, and I know Shannon was watching and cheering for him.
She was. She'll be back next week. Happy New Year, sir. All right.
Happy New Year.
Meanwhile, after joining in a unanimous UN Security Council vote to sanction North Korea on Friday, Russian officials offered to mediate talks between the U.S. and the Kim Jong-un regime. Today, the State Department rebuffed that offer, a spokesperson telling our Rich Edson, quote, the United States can communicate directly with North Korea through diplomatic channels. While we appreciate these offers, it is the lack of a credible negotiating partner, not the lack of a mediator, that has prevented talks. It is incumbent on the DPRK to show it is ready for credible negotiations on denuclearization. Meanwhile, a South Korean news agency is reporting something dramatic tonight. Evidence of Chinese tankers selling oil to Pyongyang. The South Koreans say the illicit trade started after a UN security resolution drastically capped North Korea's oil imports. This, of course, raising new questions about whether China is really playing a constructive role in all of this. Meanwhile, Israel's transportation manager is pushing ahead with a plan to dig a railway tunnel under Jerusalem's Old City and name a station, yes, after President Trump. The project would extend Jerusalem's soon-to-open high-speed rail line from Tel Aviv to the Western Wall. It's not just a train station. Trump naming mania is sweeping the Holy City after the commander-in-chief moved forward with his promise to officially recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, a move denounced by the UN, but of course very popular in Israel. Several municipal projects are expected to be named after the president, including a proposal to change the name of Saladin Street, named for the Islamic leader who drove the Crusaders out of the Holy Land. That street runs through the old city's Muslim quarter and would be renamed to, yes, Donald Trump Street. That should get interesting if it happens. Meanwhile, the president getting another boost from corporate America tonight. Are you about to get a bonus in your paycheck? And that may be why Democrats who voted against the tax cuts are suddenly changing their tune. What the shift in tone tells us about the Trump tax cuts actually going to the middle class. Next. And later, why did the liberal Vanity Fair magazine just run a video suggesting Hillary Clinton should learn to knit? Sounds kind of sexist, don't you think? Plus, First Lady Melania Trump takes a selfie and it breaks the internet. What's up with all the ill will toward the First Lady? We'll get some answers from a top author coming up. President Trump is once again touting the stock market as evidence the economy is on the right track. He made the comments tonight during a visit with local firefighters in West Palm Beach. All this as Democrats seem to be warming a bit to those tax cuts they voted against. Let's bring in Ellison Barber now with the details. Good to see you.
Good to see you. This was an unannounced visit, at least for those of us in the press, and President Trump did thank the firefighters for the work that they do. He took a question from one of them and then moved on to talking about tax reform.
That's the legislation of all legislation. That's the biggest there is. And that included Anwar, as you know. And it included the repeal of the individual minimum, the most unpopular thing, which most people thought should have been unconstitutional. But we repealed it. And we got Anwar, which is going to be one of the great drilling sites of the world, one of the great oil reserves of the world. We have a lot of things. But we had a lot of legislation passed. And here's an example of something that soon will be passed and done.
Trump signed tax reform before the holidays, but it is still on many people's minds. Senator Lindsey Graham released a statement today saying he was part of a celebration where a South Carolina company, Nephron Pharmaceuticals, quote, announced a 5% pay raise for employees as a direct result of the recent tax cut. The House approved the tax reform bill 224 to 201. Most no votes came from Democrats, some from Republicans in high tax states. In the Senate, every present Republican voted in favor of the bill. All 48 Democrats voted against it. Democrats said the bill disproportionately benefits the wealthy and corporations.
I understand you're not a fan of the tax bill. You don't like the large corporate tax cut, and you're not happy with the tax cuts for the wealthy. But according to the Tax Policy Center, next year, 91% of middle-income Americans will receive a tax cut. Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, it is a very good thing, and that's why we should have made the tax breaks for the middle class permanent. But what the Republicans did is made the tax breaks for corporations permanent, the tax breaks for the middle class temporary.
In the next week or so, President Trump is set to meet with Republican leaders at Camp David. That's according to the White House. Legislative Director Mark Short told Fox News Sunday Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Paul Ryan are both invited to Camp David the first weekend in January. Short says the goal is to make sure they're all on the same page when it comes to legislative priorities. Sarah Huckabee Sanders told Fox News just last week the administration is still deciding on their top priorities in 2018, but some potential items include infrastructure, immigration reform. The tax reform debate is far from over. That certainly seems like it could be a topic of discussion as well.
Absolutely. They're talking about welfare reform, a big plate.
Yes, yep.
Good to see him.
You too.
Well, you heard Senator Sanders yourself. The tax cuts are a, quote, very good thing, but he said they should have been permanent. Seems like a partial endorsement, at least, of President Trump's tax overhaul from an unusual source. It begs the question, would Democrats vote on extending those tax cuts? Just one of many questions for Philippe Reines, former senior advisor to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and Eric Erickson, the founder of The Resurgent and a Fox News contributor. Good to see you both. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Sure, thanks for having us.
Philippe, you and I have talked about this off camera, but let's get it on the record now. Do you agree with Bernie Sanders that these tax cuts are not so bad?
Well, I think you, Eric, and I are going to benefit from tax cuts. And I think it's hard enough coming on Fox and talking about Hillary Clinton. I'm certainly not going to defend Bernie Sanders. But I think his point is correct that they were made permanent for corporations and not for individuals.
But hang on, let me unpack that, and I'll give you more time. First of all, you took that little shot that the three of us are going to do well. Mm-hmm. When Bernie Sanders himself said the Tax Policy Center, which both sides say is kosher here, 91% of middle-income Americans are going to get the break. So you may say that people in Washington are going to do great. Actually, the middle class is going to do fine. Will you admit that?
Well, nearly 10% of the middle class is tens of millions of people. there are people watching this show right now who think they're going to get a tax cut, who aren't going to find out for months, if not a year, that they're not. And that's not okay. And if you look at the brackets, I believe that 91% is the lowest guaranteed number of any of the brackets.
Okay, I want to bring Eric in here. Eric, I don't understand what's going on here. Every single Democrat in the House and Senate voted against it, and now they're saying, wait, make it permanent, make it permanent. The problem is you didn't make it permanent, but they didn't vote for it temporarily.
Right. You know, only 5% of Americans under this bill, according to the Tax Policy Center, are going to get a tax increase, and all of them make over $1 million a year. This is going to be a tax policy that benefits people. And by the way, it is the corporate tax cuts that Bernie Sanders didn't really want to do that are causing people to see suddenly a $15 minimum wage by some corporations and $1,000 bonuses from other corporations. And it is also the policy Barack Obama wanted, a corporate tax rate of 20%. It's actually 21 by Republicans. So the middle class is totally going to benefit from this, and the Democrats are now in an awkward position of having campaigned against it.
Eric, let me ask you a follow-up. We'll go back to Philippe. Rich Lowry had an interesting tweet. He said in the last 24 hours, quote, first thing Republicans should do when they're back in January is make Democrats vote on extending all the middle-class tax cuts. What do you think about calling the bluff and saying, okay, the corporate tax cuts are permanent, so are the personal ones?
I think it's a great idea. We'll probably see Democrats argue over what is middle class, but I think they ought to try it.
Yeah, Philippe, I want to bring you in on something real quick, a different topic, the FBI. You retweeted James Comey and some of his truth and justice tweets, these long-thinking things he does lately, and you said, dude, do you not take any responsibility for this mess or damaging the FBI? Drop the sanctimony and take your share. I'll give you 30 seconds to explain that, but also, will you now admit then that some of the people at the FBI under Comey, Andrew McCabe and others, were biased in favor of Hillary Clinton, never should have been involved in that probe?
The point I'm making and that I've made in the past is that Jim Comey has politicized the FBI more than any director since Hoover, and there were steps put in place to prevent another Hoover. He violated DOJ and FBI rules last year, and now he's upset that after meddling in a partisan and an election, that there are people suffering for it. And no, look, there are 10,000 FBI agents. I imagine at least 50% of them are Democrats. I think more likely, probably a much higher number.
Right.
They're allowed to have
This is America.
opinions.
People are allowed to have political opinions. However, when Peter Strzok is texting, Donald Trump is an idiot, I can smell the Trump supporters in Walmart, that suggests more than just your opinion.
No, he texted that. I'm not going to defend the Peter Strzok, and I think neither will Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller relieved him and kicked him off his team, which is the right thing to do. But Strzok also tweeted those things before he had anything to do with this investigation.
All right,
I think unless Mueller's entire team were wearing MAGA hats, that we'd be discussing that they are not suitable for this task.
I want to get Eric in on this and a whole bunch. We're going to bring you both back in a couple of minutes. Philippe and Eric stand by. Meanwhile, coming up, another Democratic congressman under fire. Reportedly, a toxic work environment. What his former staffers are claiming. And later, Vanity Fair sparking backlash. We're going to talk to the fellas about this from the left with a video mocking Hillary Clinton and her failed presidential bid. Vanity Fair, what happened there? A Democratic congressman from California is reportedly under fire for fostering what is being called a toxic work environment. Los Angeles area rep Brad Sherman allegedly shows, quote, zero interest in his staffers or any of these allegations. 8 former aides, however, are saying the environment was so bad, it's almost laughable to think staff would have felt comfortable raising their concerns. The aides are claiming verbal abuse from the congressman and that senior staff bullied and demoralized them. We'll have more on this in the days ahead. Let's bring the boys back. Philippe Reines, former senior advisor to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and Eric Erickson, the founder of The Resurgent and Fox News contributor. All right, we were just talking James Comey. I gave Philippe a chance. I saw you champing at the bit, Eric. What do you think about James Comey now trying to be this paragon of virtue?
Well, you know, I have to agree with Philippe to a degree that James Comey did politicize the FBI, and he's politicized the investigation. He did make political decisions, I think, in 2016. We also know to a degree, I mean, from a Republican perspective, that he didn't go far enough. It looks like they changed the wording on letters related to Hillary Clinton. James Comey was not a good FBI director, and no one should hold him up as a paragon of virtue, and James Comey should probably stay off Twitter.
I bet Philippe does agree with that. But Philippe, you know what? It dawns on me, there's a question I want to ask you for a while. No bias, no bull. About, and you're laughing, about 2 months before Hillary Clinton was, quote unquote, exonerated the first time, and I get you're still upset that in October, James Comey decided to bring this all back. But about 2 months before the July news conference, with the help of Peter Strzok, James Comey was drafting an exoneration statement before Hillary Clinton was even interviewed. Even you, as a friend and advisor to Hillary Clinton, you have to realize that makes no sense.
No bull?
No bull.
I think it showed that he was prejudging. Guilty. Not the way you think.
But why'd they change all the, I'll let you answer, but why'd they change all the language to say this was not intent?
Because as the evidence showed and as the interview showed, there was no there. And as one of the people interviewed, I can tell you that they realized that this was silly. It was a dumb mistake, but it was an even dumber scandal.
Eric, you buy that?
No, not really. I mean, this is the James Comey who also decided to collaborate with Christopher Steele.
Yeah, what about that? What about the fact, Philippe, that the DNC and the Clinton campaign paid for the dossier, and then when Rod Rosenstein was asked under oath a couple weeks back on the Hill, he's a deputy attorney general, of course, do you know whether or not the FBI paid for parts of the dossier? He said, I think I know, but I can't say, and wouldn't answer the question under oath. What about the dossier that the Clinton campaign helped pay for?
Well, you named two of the three groups that helped pay for the dossier, but not the first group. It was originally commissioned by a Republican group.
Correct, fair enough, but they
trying to hurt Donald Trump.
But they did not pay the British spy. The Free Beacon was paying for business information.
I think
a distinction.
If you talk to people in the law enforcement and intelligence community, Christopher Steele has an immaculate reputation. He was head of the Russia station for British intelligence. I don't think that but for that history and their belief in his credentials that they would have done this. And frankly, I think we're going to learn that parts of the dossier are proving true. And I think that's why the FBI wanted to continue to pursue it.
Eric, last word on this and we'll talk Vanity Fair.
Yeah, you know, I think this all goes back to the fantasy of Hillary Clinton. I mean, she ran a bad campaign. I don't think the FBI handed the election to Donald Trump. I don't think the Russians did either. And
it certainly didn't help.
Trying to say that the Russians did this is kind of a security blanket for Democrats who don't want to admit they nominated a terrible candidate.
Meanwhile, we're ending 2017 with no evidence of Russian collusion. We'll see what we find in 2018. Correct. The investigation is open. Meanwhile, Vanity Fair, as I mentioned, sparked outrage this week, posting a video mocking Hillary Clinton in her second failed bid for the White House. The 63-second video suggesting different New Year's resolutions for her, including taking up knitting. It has critics claiming it's sexist. Vanity Fair since said it was an attempt at humor that missed the mark. Quick look, you decide.
Take up a new hobby in the new year. Volunteer work, knitting, improv comedy, literally anything that'll keep you from running again.
Philippe, what say you?
Well, the humor certainly missed the mark, which is the most appalling part of this whole thing. But I don't think the intent missed the mark. Vanity Fair knew exactly what they're doing. Maybe the woman who read that part, who has said that she's offended that anyone was offended, didn't know. But that's naive. The person who wrote that script and the person who handed that script to a woman to read, they knew exactly what they were doing. Vanity Fair was attacking, ironically, Hillary Clinton for straining to remain relevant in their eyes, while Vanity Fair is straining to remain relevant. It was out of bounds. It was stupid. It was not funny. But I think they got the attention they wanted. We're standing here talking
We're talking about it now. And
yeah.
Eric, I see you smiling. I bet a fight between Clinton fans and Vanity Fair is one where you're just licking your chops.
Yeah, you know, this is one of the examples of Trump's election has just ruined comedy. They're not funny anymore. This was really actually a dumb video.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess it got Vanity Fair buzz. It was just dumb. No humor at all in it.
All right. We found some area of agreement. Maybe this will be a happy new year indeed. Philippe, Eric, appreciate you both coming in.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Good to see you. California couple has been arrested, meanwhile, on felony charges after police were tipped off about their high-tech drug dealing. Riverside, California police say they have never seen anything quite like this, and that's kind of why I'm chuckling right now. After conducting surveillance of the pair's home, police discovered what appeared to be a drone flying and dropping drugs in a nearby parking lot. Neighbors say once the drugs were delivered, customers would drive by the home and throw cash on the front lawn. Real news, not fake news, and it's a little bizarre. Coming up, Ivanka Trump scores a political win. Turns out she played a bigger role in the tax overhaul talks than the mainstream media gave her credit for. We'll talk to a lawmaker who is in the room. He has firsthand knowledge and wants to talk about it. And later, First Lady Melania Trump taking flack on social media yet again, this time after posting a Christmas selfie. Don't the haters have something better to do? Apparently not. Details coming up. Presidential advisor and first daughter Ivanka Trump scored a political victory on the tax reform bill. The first daughter spent months lobbying behind the scenes to have the child tax credit doubled as part of the legislation. Republican Congressman David Schweikert of Arizona has some firsthand knowledge of just how big her role was. He joins us now live. Good to see you, Congressman.
No, I appreciate the chance.
Let's talk a little bit about this. We've been talking throughout the year, frankly, since day one of this administration. There's been an unprecedented assault on the president, his family. His daughter Ivanka is obviously part of that. And yet in these negotiations, you were working closely with her. How influential was she?
Look, she actually surprised me. Have you ever had that moment where you're starting to speak to someone and they come back with they actually know their facts, they understand the mechanics, and they understand also the cost and the difficulties. Mm-hmm. And because she knew her stuff, it made her actually a real player in the discussion.
That's interesting. Give me one example of that so we can understand. I mean, Marco Rubio, others deserve credit as well. He was pushing very hard. You as well. But give me an example of what she was like behind the scenes.
Well, this has been a passion of Mike Lee and Rubio for a long time. Mm-hmm. And to have Ivanka Trump actually sort of be the face of the discussion and understand, it's costly. You do spend in the tax code. Yeah. But also, even engaging in some really technical conversations, we actually have a birth rate crisis in the United States. We're not having enough children. Mm-hmm. And programs like Social Security and Medicare are pay-as-you-go programs. Sure. So in about 18, 20 years, we don't have enough young workers moving into the workforce. And she was able to take that little statistic in our conversations, turn it around and say, here's another reason we should make a family-friendly tax code to see if that would also encourage families to actually grow in size.
So let's broaden the conversation. You may have heard at the top of the hour we were talking about how magically Bernie Sanders and others, either who are independent and align with the Democrats or actual Democratic senators and House members, all of a sudden are saying the problem, Congressman, is you did not make the middle class tax cuts permanent. I find that interesting for two reasons. They're calling them middle class tax cuts after claiming they were for the rich, so there's maybe progress. And secondly, they now want something that they voted against to be permanent. Can you explain to me what in the world's going on?
Oh, you nailed it. I'm very impressed. The Democrats in the Senate could have made those tax cuts permanent instead of having to do the phase out or the expiration because of meeting the budgetary, the bird rule, the bird rules as we'll call it. But they actually objected, forcing that.
They objected and then voted no on the final version.
Exactly. So in the process, those very Democrats could have said, we want this to be permanent, and it would have been. Look, I think there's this weird misalignment. If you actually talk to a lot of the Democrats, particularly even on Ways and Means, there's things they wanted, but there's a lot of things they liked. A lot of things in this legislation they had worked on for years. Yeah. But they made it very clear if they stand up and say nice things, they're afraid of their own base.
So last question.
The Democrat base has gotten so radicalized.
Yeah, pardon me, but last question. So you know better than anyone, politicians in both parties, it's not just Democrats. They respond to the polls. They respond to what people back home in Arizona or elsewhere are saying. And all we heard for weeks and weeks is that the polls show that this tax cut is unpopular. When you have Democrats stampeding now to make it permanent, does that tell you that public opinion's turning on this?
Well, remember, the 1986, the Reagan tax cuts had only an 18% favorability when they passed. And look what happened in the following decade when people understood what it meant for jobs in the economy.
Congressman, off the air, you told me it was 77 degrees there in Scottsdale today. I'm going to try to let that go without complaint. It's a little frigid here in Washington. Nonetheless, we appreciate you bringing a little warmth tonight, and Happy New Year almost.
And Happy New Year's to yours.
All right, good to see you, sir. First Lady Melania Trump, meanwhile, tweeted out a Merry Christmas photo. No big deal, right? So why in the world was she trolled? That's next. First Lady Melania Trump taking flack on social media after posting this harmless Christmas selfie. Hashtag Merry Christmas. The First Lady tweeted with emojis of Santa and a Christmas tree. The photo, which features a Santa hat and reindeer, unleashed a flurry of messages from detractors on Twitter. Andy Oak is the self-proclaimed First Ladies man and author of Unusual for Their Time, Volumes 1 and 2. And let me say, along with my book, 42 Faith, it makes an amazing New Year's gift.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
What in the world is happening? I remember a couple of weeks ago, the First Lady, as all First Ladies, Democrat or Republican, decorated the White House for Christmas. There were people on social media slamming her. Do they not have anything better to do?
Well, unfortunately, Ed, this isn't a new thing to criticize a First Lady. I think back to the 7th administration, Andrew Jackson's wife, Rachel, was blasted in the papers for being a pipe-smoking hillbilly from Tennessee when he ran against John Quincy
fighting
Adams.
words.
Yes, back in the day, that was horrible, horrible things. You wouldn't want someone to say that about a loved one.
Bill Sapphire called Hillary Clinton a congenital liar, and Bill Clinton wanted to punch him in the nose, as I recall.
You can imagine there were duels back in the 1800s that would have taken care of that. But I think, in the modern world, we embrace social media and expect our First Ladies to do the same. Michelle Obama and Melania Trump are the first to have the opportunity to do that. And in that arena comes a lot of criticism.
On that point, we have a tweet here. Someone actually tweeted out, disgraceful for a First Lady, about this photo. Christmas or not, you look like a model on a photo shoot for the front page of Hustler. I'm sure the elderly and poor will appreciate this photo given how you and hubby don't care about them, only your millionaire friends at Mar-a-Lago. So you also see the anger that's really directed at her husband.
At her husband, yeah. And this is unprecedented, I think, and it gets worse and worse with each administration. People are upset with their husband and they take it out, and they have this platform of social media where they can go uncensored and unregulated virtually and say whatever they want about what I would agree with you is a harmless, filtered Snapchat tweet type of thing that everyone's doing.
And I would also note this, earlier this week, there was some chatter on social media about how the Andrew Jackson tree was going to be taken down by Melania Trump, and somehow this was her fault. The National Arboretum came out and said, well, the tree's been dying for years. She tried to save it. And I will say, credit to Chelsea Clinton. She tweeted out, thank you to all the chief horticulturists and everyone from the National Park Service who have taken care of the beautiful grounds of the White House over the years. Thank you at FLOTUS for preserving part of a tree I and so many have treasured. So I think Chelsea Clinton understands, like few others, what it's like to have this garbage thrown at you.
For sure, and I think we should follow Chelsea's lead in a situation like that and commend the First Lady, who has been criticized for not embracing the role or not taking it seriously. She had concern for the press and visitors, thought this decaying tree would be falling on people. You've been there on that same grounds more times than I have over the years and wouldn't want a big limb falling on your head, and she preserved history and a tree loved by many for years. The Jackson administration. Sure, they got her out there with like chainsaws and a lumberjack outfit
like
tearing
she's
it
taking down a tree.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
yeah. She pruned it almost unnoticeably.
Important point to make as well. That amid the attacks, this First Lady is very popular. There's a Gallup poll from the beginning of this month. 54% have a favorable opinion of First Lady Melania Trump, 33% unfavorable, 3% never heard of her, 10% no opinion. I want to figure out the 3% who have never heard of the First Lady. But this is something we said. I remember covering George W. Bush in the depths of the Iraq War when he was struggling. Laura Bush was very popular. This happens.
Well, it does, very much so. These are possibly and arguably the most powerful unelected and unpaid women in the world by virtue of who they are married to. And when they step out in these roles, we can take them more as human, and they take on more human roles and causes and philanthropic endeavors, and they poll higher, always.
You study them all, and we hear so often, there's never been a president like this. True. Maybe there's never been a first lady like this, has there?
Well, you know, I said from the very beginning, the early stages of the campaign, she has everything that we historically love in a first lady. She's intelligent. She speaks multiple languages.
5, 6 languages.
5, 6 some languages. She is young. She's attractive. She's raising a child in the White House.
Yeah, true.
These are things that, especially on the international stage, would play out for a First Lady very well, as they did for Jacqueline Kennedy, a fashionista. The more we see of Melania Trump and the more we see her embrace her role publicly, the more we like her.
And that will overshadow the haters, I suspect.
I think so.
Andy Oak, good luck with the new book.
Thank you very much.
All right, coming up, just days away from saying goodbye to 2017, we'll tell you how cities all across America are getting ready for the big celebrations. Jugglers, acrobat artists, and even a strongman had a special audience where? At the Vatican. A circus troupe performed for Pope Francis during his weekly audience in what has become a regular Christmas tradition. The Holy Father used the address to remind his audience the tradition of gift giving was, quote, a sign of our gratitude for the gift of Jesus and our desire to share him with others. That's pretty awesome. Meanwhile, security on the Vegas Strip will be more intense than ever, following October's mass shooting that left over 50 dead. Officials say the number of personnel will double and will include snipers, spotters, and aerial support, along with over 300 National Guard members monitoring events in the airport. More than 300,000 visitors are expected to ring in the new year on the Strip. Meanwhile, in New York City, officials also tightening security, of course, preparing for thousands to crowd Times Square this weekend. The finishing touches being put on the Waterford Crystals as crews assemble the famous Times Square ball. The theme this year, the gift of serenity. Meanwhile, a couple days ago, I tweeted out, what would you like to see on the show while I fill in? Many of you said Shannon Bream. Okay, I get it. Shannon's better. That was a pretty funny response. But many others who were nicer to me said they wanted to see positive news, so batter up. Arizona Diamondbacks first baseman Pavin Smith warming the hearts this holiday season. For Christmas, he paid off his parents' mortgage. Smith posted this video to his Twitter account of his mother reading a note from him that read, because of all the sacrifices you made to get me where I am, I want our family home to be yours. Awesome. Some good news. And before we go, a couple of programming notes, a lot of focus on the President-Trump golf game. We're going to have Dana Quigley, who played golf with the president this week. Talk all about that. And New Year's Eve, you see that. I'm going to be with Lisa Booth and Dean Cain, 8 p.m. Eastern, countdown to 2018. And then Jesse Waters and Kennedy, they're going to take the primetime piece, 10 p.m. Eastern to midnight. You got to be there Sunday night. We'll be back tomorrow night right here, Fox News at Night.